Hello and welcome to the CX Files for October 9th, 2025. My name is Mark Hillary and back in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Back in Sao Paulo. Well, Mark, welcome back to Sao Paulo. I am back in Canada after some time in Asia as well as in Europe, literally around the world, which is always a fun trip to do. And I'm excited this week because we are going to be talking a little bit about a visit that was done earlier on this year in July, as a matter of fact, to Georgia. Now, this visit was sponsored by Enterprise Georgia. It's one that I was involved with, for full disclosure, along with my business partner and a friend of yours and mine, Michael Danofsky. We took approximately 15 outsourcing stakeholders, CX stakeholders, and influencers to Georgia for a number of days to find out a little bit what was happening in that jurisdiction as it relates to CX delivery, to IT services, as well as broader outsourcing on the whole. And we decided that we were going to pull together some of our friends who were on the trip, specifically Jasen Shirley, Elona Ymeri, and Traci Freeman, who was on the podcast last week, to find out a little bit about what their thoughts were on the back of the visit to Tbilisi and the surrounding area.
Okay, that's great, and it's great to get their feedback directly from what they feel about the trip. I think that in general, this kind of trip is really essential, but it's sort of dropped off in the last few years. I think that maybe since the pandemic, we've seen these things happening less often.
Yeah, I
And
would
so
agree.
so that the guys there really seem to understand that if they want analysts and investors to really understand what's going on the ground, they need to get people over there rather than just relying on what's in the media.
I would agree with you. There has been a drop off, and I think that post pandemic, there certainly has been a rationalization within a lot of organizations about their enthusiasm or their capacity to manage these trips. But as you say, it's important to get on the ground. It's important to find out what's happening. You've got to have a feel for the place. And this is what I tried to tease out with Elona, with Traci, and with Jasen. And it's important to note that Jasen comes from the CX buy side. Elona is with an outsourcer. Traci's an influencer. They all have different perspectives, but you'll see when we start talking to them that what they're able to do is coalesce around all the key elements that they thought were the most compelling with regards to Georgia as a potential delivery point, as well as maybe some areas in which Georgia needs to work. Or some areas that they think Georgia might not necessarily be ticking the boxes, but you will get a very objective view from three very different perspectives about Georgia, which is emerging very rapidly as a destination of choice for a whole series of, I would say, higher value outsource elements.
Well, we also have Alona coming up fairly soon. I don't know the exact date, but I'm talking to her in the near future about smaller destinations and how they are increasing in value. So why don't we go straight to this conversation about Georgia and your conversation with all of these different people?
Fantastic. And a very good evening, good morning, or good afternoon to wherever you might be in the world. And I say that knowing full well we've got a very international contingent of guests on this week's CX Files. Now, to set the stage for our discussion, a few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of working with Enterprise Georgia, which is a division of the Georgian government, to bring in a number of CX stakeholders, influencers, buyers, and outsourcers from different parts of the world. And the visit was so interesting, was so provocative, and so intriguing that I felt it would be a very wise move to bring some of the participants on who traveled in to Tbilisi to find out a little bit about what they got out of the visit, a few of their impressions about Georgia, and to talk about where Georgia sits in the broader CX and BPO ecosystem. I'm going to ask each one of these international representatives to introduce themselves, starting with Ilona.
Good afternoon, actually, because here it's afternoon and it's such a pleasure to be here. I'm Elona. I'm based in Tirana, Albania, the beautiful Albania, and I work as a business development for Assist Digital, a pan-European company.
Super. Thanks, Ilona. Traci, over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter, and thanks for having us on CX File. So it's Traci Freeman from South Africa, Johannesburg. Yeah, we're going into early evening and really grateful that we're coming out of winter.
And last but certainly not least, Jasen Shirley.
Hey, and again, thank you so much for the invite for this. My name is Jasen Shirley. I'm the head of sales and service for SIXT Global, international rental car company. I've been with SIXT for about 2 years. I've been in the CX space for about 30 years. So just happy to be a part of this.
And we're delighted that you, Jasen, as well as Traci and Elona, can be part of this discussion as well. Now, obviously, Georgia is a destination that not a lot of people have heard of when it comes to offshore outsourcing. And that's really going to be the crux of what we're going to talk about over the course of the next little while. And as I always say to my guests, this is a conversation, not an interrogation. We want to hear what you feel about Georgia. We want to get a sense about what you found on the ground, and maybe a good point of reference to start this off with. And I think Jasen, I'm going to start with you on this one. Prior to the trip in July, none of you had the chance to visit Georgia. So, Jasen, maybe starting with yourself, did you have any preconceptions of what Georgia was like as a country or as a BPO destination? Or did you have any visibility into its positioning as a CX delivery point?
So you guys gave a lot of really good information. And I purposely skimmed a lot of that stuff because I didn't want to come in with any preconceived notions. I wanted to walk in as if I were a client looking at this location for the first time with very, very, very little information. To answer your question about Georgia, no, I'd never heard. I've heard of Georgia, but not necessarily in the context of a BPO location, more just the geopolitical things that were happening prior to that are the last 30 years. So it was really, really eye-opening. But again, I went in a little cold, and that was a bit deliberate. When I got there, I was pleasantly surprised. There are obviously remnants of past regimes, but it sat more like a historical memory more than a current of influence, if I could say that. You still felt the old regime's way of thinking per se as related to business. Things were very structured. It's funny, we actually had a joke. Nathan and I were talking. It's like I don't think I've ever been to a place where people were just so pleasant and really calm. Um, so that was very interesting. And then from a business standpoint, the level of preparedness that they had and the ability to articulate, define finer points of that location was extremely, really, really good, and gave me a really good impression. The locations that we went to, the visit was very well thought out, and they had a command of what they felt, not only from a business perspective, but from a cultural alignment with the U.S. It was very, I didn't feel that it was going to be so aligned. And there were movies that in one of the Sprinter van conversations, there were movies that we were talking about that people were very, very familiar with. So the affinity to the U.S. Was much better than I expected. So, that's really my take on it.
Listen, Jasen, I think that you're touching on something that's really important, and that's that cultural affinity. And Ilona, as I think a little bit about yourself with Assist Digital, and Assist Digital has got a number of different deployments. Obviously, you've experienced firsthand the need for a delivery point to be in a destination that's got a cultural affinity, whether it's with Western Europe or with North America. How did you find that whole dynamic about being on the ground in Georgia as it related to the country and the people's ability to understand you as a visitor and to be able to relate to you from a cultural standpoint?
But I have to say, I have to follow up with what Jason said. I didn't know a lot about Georgia, but I was impressed. Humanly, first, I was impressed by the passion and by the warmth that I saw there. And business-wise, what I saw was a genuine enthusiasm where you see it, but you don't see it that often. And then genuine enthusiasm was quite impressive. Also, the natural cultural alignment and the communication style, especially with Europe and also with Asia. So you see that the time zone, which is similar to Europe, so it's quite comforting in what we offer on the CX. Another thing that for me was impressive was also the internet speed that they are providing, which is very fast and it's very quite impressive. Apart from that, another thing that was quite interesting was the co-working spaces, which gave a lot of opportunities to companies or to CX to operate in sometimes similar or quite different ways in how we are operating in other countries. So I have to say that a lot of facilities were given and a lot of interesting things taking consideration also the time frame that they are operating. And I was positively surprised with everything.
And that's good. And Traci, as I think a little bit about the work that you've done in the past, especially doing similar type of initiatives, bringing potential investors into South Africa. This time you were there, you were participating as an influencer on a visit, as somebody who's got their, I would say, their ear to the ground, their finger on the pulse of what's going on, not just in terms of South Africa, but Africa on the whole, as well as the globe, with the work you're doing with CX outsourcers. How would you categorize, or how would you almost conceptualize what was pulled off during this visit into Georgia by the team at Enterprise Georgia with regards to not just the logistics and how they were managed, but what the individual delegates saw and the relevance to the BPO or to the CX space?
Yeah, it's a great question, Peter, and thanks for that. So, I mean, I'd say ditto on what Elona and Jasen had to say, but one of the big things that I know from having hosted such events in the likes of South Africa and beyond is that you cannot judge a country prior to actually putting your feet on the ground. There's an energy on the ground when you engage with the people, and it's not necessarily the curated event that you're looking at and the pre-organized meetings. It's really about the opportunity for the executives that go through and visit to have that free time to be able to walk around, to chat to folk on the street. That gives you a true sense of what it is that the country has to offer. So we've had the obvious privilege of meeting with the Enterprise Georgia team, with them having been partners at the CX Outsourcers event. So I did have a bit of an insight and some assumption of what it was that I was going to experience or see. Yourself and Michael Danowski helped the Enterprise Georgia team put on a fantastic agenda. It really, really was very thorough. There was enough time for executives to get to know one another, which is critical. I think that that's often underplayed, is for the global executive community to actually gather together as a team that's going to be, doing walkabout in the city and in the country. So that was fantastic. There was ample time for us to actually walk around, engage, and literally meet Joe Public, have open conversations. And I was super, super impressed. Knowing that we were coming into a relatively small country, I mean, there are 4 million people, to engaging with the sort of the vibrancy. And as Jasen was saying, it's really where old charm meets modern facilities, modern technology, modern business. So that was really, really surprising for me. And then there's a couple of things that you don't always think to ask, but just being on the ground, what I loved, the country is so clean, the city is so clean. There was hardly any litter. And what stood out for me front and center is the national pride of the people. They are proudly Georgian, but so hospitable and welcoming to the guests that came through. Literally from someone in the street that you just sort of, greet, and you don't get that in every country where you can greet people on the street. You absolutely can in Georgia, through to the waitering staff, through to the service staff at the hotels, and then obviously the meetings that we had with the different executives through the actual agenda. So I'll pause there.
Great. So as I think a little bit about Traci, what you just brought up, the presentations, the visits that we did, as I think a little bit about how the entire concept of an immersion into what Georgia means for the CX space. Jasen, I'll throw it back to you here. Which presentations or which visits do you think were most impactful for you as a CX buyer, as somebody that has the potential to engage with an outsourcer in Georgia, or even to think about putting up a facility for your own organization in country? I'd be curious to know, and by the way, I'm not counting the visit to Chateau Mukrani on that.
No, thank you. Thank you. It's a point I had just written down. I think the one thing that was most impactful was the ease of entry. It's probably one of the few countries that it's almost like they have a template to walk you right through from where you will stay, where you will work, where you will play. Here's how you would get into this. Here is the way it's set up. I got a very strong feeling, it was already articulated to us when we met with the Minister of Finance and the economic folks that we met with. But when you actually go into the actual environment and you see it's not just talk, they are dedicated and committing to ease of entry. How can I make this the most simple as I can? 1, 2, 3 process. We understand that people might not be from here. It was very thoughtful in the way they do it. And this isn't in any way a bias, because this is not that I think that this can only be just these types of people, but you could feel the young, energetic mindset, forward thinking. How do we make this simple? How do we do things the right way? How do we make sure our company understands the value proposition? How do we put the right people in the right place? And again, it's just we have a template here, just use it. Really, really felt different and well thought out from a client perspective. It's like they took the time to really think about what would a client like. And I'm sure there's some of your influence there, but however they got it, they have a really good command of it.
So as we think a little bit about what would a client like, what would be relevant to a client, Elona, it's an interesting thing to ponder, because as I consider a location like Georgia, especially for an outsourcing firm like Assist Digital that's already got a number of different deployments, where do you see Georgia fitting into that broader European nearshore delivery dynamic?
Well, I have to say that first and foremost, and I'm going to follow up a bit with what Jason said. First, I was surprised that you can open a company in 1 or 24 hours. I was like impressively and positively surprised about that, about Georgia. So that's a very good thing for a company because it facilitates a lot. Apart from that, what I would like to say is that talking to some of the BPO providers and some of the owners of the BPO, you have a multilingual pool of people speaking here about German, speaking about English, speaking here about Russian, speaking about Italian, and also Spanish. Apart from that, talking also about costs. So if we compare the cost of Georgia compared to other markets, it was quite impressive and positively attractive. Another thing that stood up actually for me was the fact that you see this very passionate pool of people willing with a very desire to improve in the BPO world. So I think that it's a very attractive market for big company like Assist Digital, and it provides a lot of potential. Apart from that, another thing apart from the BPO is the digital world, which today it's moving so fast. And we had a lot of meetings also with some of the owners, which gives us a lot of information regard to that, and it facilitated a lot. So talking about where do I see Georgia in regard to or with Assist Digital, it's a very attractive market. It's a very attractive market. And returning back from Georgia, actually talking to the board members of Assist Digital, it was a very big marketing done from my side, that it's a very impressive market that might be very interesting also for potential clients, because from our conversation and meeting in Georgia, we met a lot of big players that are already operating in the Georgia market.
So, Jason, I'm going to throw the baton to you just for a second here, because Elona raised a really good point about technology, know-how, and digital skills. And as we think a little bit about the delivery of CX and frontline services moving forward, there's no two ways about it. Those digital skills and that technology talent is going to be more important than ever. And as we look to try and perhaps parallel where things are sitting in regards to these places, to different parts of the world, and how they play out. Based on what you saw in Georgia, how does its talent pool when it comes to tech and to digital fare relative to some of the other spots that perhaps are more established or more well known?
Yep. So as I said, I've been doing this a long time. So I'm an old dog, right? So I've been into emerging markets, first markets. I remember what Dominican Republic and even Costa Rica were like when I first came there on exploratory visit. I will say this about Georgia. Georgia is not a place where you have to start off with entry level work. That location could easily do advanced financial services, advanced law services, and things that are going to command a higher per hour billable rate, um, relatively, but not out of line with but in line with competitive areas. So I think it felt like I would be comfortable putting, yeah, like accounting work, legal work. I would absolutely, the people were very smart. It seems like the education and the fact that they're subsidizing their college education kind of speaks to the why behind. It was almost like a culture. There was no, it's either you went to the military or you went to school. I didn't hear anybody talking about anything else. It was a very, very focused mindset. And I think that adds to the fact and their ability to now look at doing more complicated work, just because I think that they are very intentionally, deliberately going after that. However, I also think it's intrinsic in the culture.
But Traci, that I think is an important point Jasen brings up about it's a destination where it's not perhaps entry level, where you're going to be going in and there's an anticipation that you're going to be able to take on more complex tasks or processes. And from this standpoint of being based in South Africa, which I think has done a very good job positioning itself as a value add destination, based on what you saw, do you feel that this could be a full meal deal niche destination for a client or for an outsourcer that's looking for potentially, yes, some frontline work, but also some of those more complex, more skills driven back end elements that go into the whole shared services nature of things?
Yeah, without a doubt, Peter. I mean, Jason sort of fed into that quite well, but there's definitely the opportunity to support more niche focus. So looking at LPO, the ITO, definitely supporting the BFSI sector, doing back office finance and accounting. Yeah, definitely KPO with the knowledge process outsourcing side of things. You could see that. And that again speaks to the education system that they have there. And really just want to reinforce the point. There's an intentionality behind government, not only to support what Elona was saying, the visitors coming in and the guests and the investors, but they genuinely support their own as well. So their intentionality about supporting the growth of the sector, but they can certainly do specialized BPO services up the value chain. And they also have a number of other European individuals coming into the country, which is what is driving their language capability besides the local citizens. So you can see that that knowledge or that talent pool is also coming in to help support. And they're very open to that, to really open their borders to their neighboring countries to come and support the growth that they have there. So without a doubt.
I was actually thinking a little bit about that after the trip in the sense that you're seeing almost a sub-segment of the population that's digital nomad that seems to be
Yeah.
coming in from different parts. So almost the same dynamic that Prague had been able to perfect a few years ago, where it wouldn't be unheard of in a place like Georgia to find a handful of speakers of, say, Dutch or Swedish or perhaps Danish, because of the fact that so many people are being attracted by the point that Alona made about great internet connectivity, the ability to work remotely and so forth. But Trace, I want to go back to something else that Alona said and get your take on this, because one of the big things that you've pushed for in South Africa is to make sure that you don't just have a business-friendly government, but the barriers to entry are reduced as much as possible. And a big takeaway, I got the sense a lot of people had, including yourself, was the visit to the Government Services Center and the ability to move things forward very quickly, the ability from a government standpoint not to stand in the way and not put barriers up. When you compare what you've seen, not just in South Africa, but all across the African continent that you've been involved with, what was what for you was the main takeaway from that visit to the Government Services Center and the approach that they take, not just to the removal of bureaucracy, but also to the delivery of government services using a customer service framework?
Peter, it blew my socks off. I was waiting for someone to say, whoopsie, April Fool's Day, just teasing, because it was so phenomenal what it is that they had to offer. And you literally had citizens from all walks of life, all ages, coming through there for, I think they offer over 500 services in their walk-in facility that we went to go see in Tbilisi. But not only that, they have these centers in each one of their towns across the country, which we sort of saw a visual representation of. The way they are citizen first. They are an example of superior customer experience and customer service for many organizations out there, never mind government. They, to me, certainly are showcasing a best practice of how it is that you can, from a government perspective, they are saying, we are here to support and service you as a citizen. How can we make your life easier so that you can go and do what you need to do to be productive on behalf of the country, to be a viable taxpaying citizen? What do we need to do to help support and service you? And they've really thought cleverly about how they've set the facility up. So if you didn't want to do it online, which you can, so it's not suggesting that everybody had to go into the walk-in facility. There's a lot of online support that's offered. But should you need to go in, the efficiency with which they operate just really blew my socks off. I mean, passports within minutes. But it doesn't mean that they've not considered all the checks and balances that are required for any of the government support and processing and documents, and that there's definitely focus in on that. But they also have feedback opportunities. So if you're looking at your CSAT stats, they literally are asking the citizen, how can we improve? How can we do better? What else should we be doing? So that to me was an absolute standout. And all of the individuals that we met within that environment, constantly open to feedback, open to innovation, and you can see that that is a top-down approach. And the citizens, well, anything that they have to say or any views they have pushing it back up are going to be considered by government and by the facilities themselves. So really, it was a standout, very impressive.
And I don't think I've ever seen a government services center where you can wait for your documentation to be ready in a cafe where they're going to serve you a Starbucks level experience in terms of quality and customer service. So again, that's a real standout. So Elona, let's think a little bit about yourself. And you talked about how you have already briefed your board of directors about what's going on in Georgia and what you saw, etc. So I'm going to put myself in the shoes of a potential client that's interested in looking at Georgia as a delivery destination. What advice would you give them when it comes to scoping Georgia out as a destination point where the end customer may or may not be serviced from? What would you say to them?
I would say that look, BPO it's changing so fast today. It's growing, but it's changing so fast with AI, with a lot of BPOs growing, but also market and language wise, and also skill wise. I would say that Georgia, it's a market to discover. It's full of potentials. It's full of one of the things that stood up during the conversation with the government. I don't know if you remember, and one of the things that I really like was the minimal bureaucratic red tape for hiring, and also the fact that Tbilisi now is becoming a hub for BPO and also digital. I would say that first the multilingual, so you can find all the possible languages for the digital nomad. I would say that the hiring process it's quite easy. I would say that the help of the government, as Traci and also Jasen mentioned, it's impressive and it's so nice. Apart from that, I would say that it's a market that it offers a lot of opportunities, and the fact that it's not saturated, it's going to help you with a low cost, but with a high and with the right quality that you are going to get everywhere else. So for me, it's a very positive feeling that I had from Georgia in regard to the business prospects.
Let's move to you, Traci, and get a sense from yourself. Being in South Africa, you've got a lot of homegrown entrepreneurs that have set up shop. And one of the things that we're seeing a lot more now, as these organizations look to expand, they're looking for white label or partnerships. Do you feel that Georgia is a spot where South African outsourcers could potentially find some of those same partners?
Oh, without a doubt. And it's going to give them that expanded opportunity to grow their capability set, number one, with specifically the niche services we spoke about, but the language set that they need, and give them that global reach that many of them are looking to achieve, especially if they are solely based in one location, being South Africa. But I think the same would be said for any BPO operator that is looking to expand their reach into the East European market, to have an alternate footprint to where they currently are. So yeah, I definitely would say, and again, just reinforcing, and we can't reinforce it enough, the ease of access to the market, and equally the ease of access to any of the operators that are already set up there, and their openness and willingness to want to partner and to want to themselves be a global player, would make that quite simple for operators. So yeah, it's definitely a good shout out. And I think probably the reason why that would also need to happen, Peter, is because with Georgia being a smaller country, they are never going to be a scale player in the global market. So in order for them to have that global scale and footprint, they will need to partner the domestically born captive BPOs in Georgia. So it's a good call.
Jason, last word for you, and this is going to be an interesting one. For full disclosure, Jason and I recently also traveled together to Jamaica. And Jamaica is, I would say, roughly the same size as Georgia. I'd say actually you probably find a lot of the same skill sets on the ground. That said, Jamaica is definitely a much more established, well-known destination for BPO executives. Jason, if you were going to give some counsel to the Georgian BPO ecosystem, the CX ecosystem, what do they need to do in order to get to that same level of acceptance, favorability, and interest as a Jamaica has been able to do? You're on mute, buddy.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
This is a tough one because I legit for a couple of times legit stepped back and said, what are they missing? And I just didn't see it. Everything from the transportation aspect to the locations of the hotel, to the way that we were eased into the cycle of how you would do business, from the getting started to where you could temporarily set up, to all those other little things that they think about. The fact that they, the other thing is I felt very safe there. I don't think I said that. That was the other thing that could, it's an intangible, but when I'm thinking about sending my employees down or sending my employees to a place, it's something that's top of mind for me. Is how safe, how would they feel there? Would they operate there? Was the transportation system the way it needed to be? Honestly, Peter, I didn't see, comparatively speaking, I didn't see a miss. And quite frankly, and this is no disparagement to the country of Jamaica, there were things that could be borrowed in just the way the trip was laid out. The thing again that they really hit on is that ease. The two things that really stuck out to me is the ease of entry. And as it relates, the ease of entry, the labor situation there, and how it works there, and the ease to kind of understand it. But then also the potential of, they really showcased their potential of doing more than just, and I think they hit on that in Jamaica where they were talking about the cybersecurity stuff. But looking at these guys doing 3D printing, looking at the transportation infrastructure that they showed, I don't know, like there was a variability. We saw trains, we saw cable cars, we saw bus lanes, we saw it didn't feel, it felt like the transportation infrastructure was stable and it was well thought out. Um, I I mean, like the culture, the food and places that we went, it immersed us in how the culture is there. Um, Honestly speaking, Peter, I don't want to make something up. I just didn't see it. I didn't see I didn't see anything. The only thing that I would say is maybe again more on the cultural affinity, like, hey, this is, this is our close, because that's already inherent in Jamaica. We already know that Jamaica has that cultural affinity. It's a destination location for the better part of the US. But that's probably the only thing is, more of, hey, let's talk about the more of the how the people are and getting a little bit more in the culture. And honestly, I'm stretching on that one. It was just a well put together trip.
Okay, super duper.
Sorry, wish I had more.
Well, that's great. No, the feedback is wonderful. So Elona Ymeri from Albania, Traci Freeman from South Africa, Jasen Shirley from the USA. Thank you all very much for appearing today on the CX Files. We really appreciate your feedback, and I hope that your positive sentiments towards Georgia continue. We had a great time collectively on the trip, and I think it was a real eye-opener for so many folks who came from the CX and the BPO ecosystem. In the interim, we wish you all well and hope that we see each other relatively soon in Georgia, or if not Georgia, somewhere else.
So thank you so much for the time and the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Awesome, Peter. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Seeing everyone.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.